Alright, so, yeah, and just feel free to shut me up if it comes out garbled.
It sounds okay right now, so just knock on wood, you know.
Yeah, fingers crossed, I can't see it. My name is Louie Roots. I'm 32, based out of Victoria, Australia. I started my game stuff pretty regularly, and then in 2013 I opened SK Games in Perth, and it was basically I had some financial backing from my family to open a game thing. Didn't know what to do exactly. Hear a bit of static. Is it?
Yeah, I'm hearing some. Hold on, I'm sorry. 1 second. So technically, fourth time will be the charm here, even though it's the third time we've tried. Okay, yeah. So yeah, if you don't mind, just first and last name, age, where you're based out of. Talk a little bit about your experience making games and how you would describe the games you've made in the past, and then I swear there are other questions past this.
Lovely. Alright, so my name is Louie Roots, based out of Victoria, Australia. I'm 32 years old. I created a game studio thing in 2013 called SK Games. SK being just two letters that have a backstory, but yeah, I mean, maybe we'll get to it, maybe we don't. It was basically a time in my life when I was doing my game stuff, like kind of regularly, working like a regular studio. And I just want to pause and say, garbled.
No, it's not. You're fine.
Alright, cool. I just heard a little bit of like...
No, I don't blame you. I don't blame you. Please proceed.
Alright, cool. SK was kind of born out of family help and not really knowing what I wanted to do. Wanting to make like games that were different, and I wanted to make games that were, I guess, for people who didn't necessarily play games. So we started this sort of like game jam kind of feel, making small stuff, making it like quite simple, easy accessibility kind of stuff, and I was making physical hardware for it, like arcade cabinet kind of style. And as it progressed, based in Perth in Western Australia, I sort of got to a point where I was making quite interesting controllers and quite big controllers, and they were really like different, but they're also very impractical, and I wasn't making them any money out of it really. So in an effort to make it sustainable, I moved to Melbourne and opened a small bar called Bar SK, thinking that I could exhibit this kind of stuff and other people's stuff and make money off booze, because that was what I thought an easy way to make money. Boy, how I was wrong. So I sort of muddled through, and then the bar closed down sort of early last year with the pandemic hitting everything, and I haven't really been making games since, but been reflecting a lot.
Yeah.
That's sort of where I'm at.
Yeah, as we all have. I mean, I guess there's a couple of places to start. Maybe one of the most basic, but also maybe one of the more profound places here, because you decided to get more involved with them. Just in the first place, why do you like video games? And there's a bunch of follow-up questions from there, but let's just start there.
I think I really like video games because I love the interaction. I love the curiosity and the playfulness of, what does this do, and what happens if I interact with that bit. The ability to kind of read against the author, where you can kind of sort of think like, what do they want me to do, and how do I do the opposite? This just has a lot of I think it has a lot of potential that I still see. I look at other mediums, I don't really see that kind of untapped potential. I wish I knew what that meant, but I just always had this kind of really interesting draw to it, like a sort of curiosity, I guess.
Well, what is that potential? Because like I definitely feel like for me, like when I play games, like that's definitely like the first thing I do is if you tell me to go right, I'm gonna want to go left. You know.
Yeah.
What and some of that may have to just do with like, you know, the sort of stuff I played growing up and just like other habits that are ingrained with me, but I guess people want to just say like, oh well, that's just play, but there's more to it than that, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. It's like it's finding out about the designer by sort of seeing what they want you to do. Like it's testing really. Like when you think they want me to go right, so I'm going to go left. And when you go left and the story progresses and you're like, ah, crap, they actually want me to go left. That's like your sort of testing hypothesis about the designer, like, you know, saying they want me to do this. And if you test it and that's correct, then you're like learning about the people who made the game. And you're trying to, and that way you can kind of like, I mean, it's like you're trying to game the system. So you're on how do they want me to act, and then what's the best way to mess with that. I mean, that's kind of what I feel. But I think that comes out of, I've played a lot of different games and kids used to like rent them out every week. So I had this sort of constantly rotating selection of, well, selection. I have one game at a time, basically, rather than have bought games. And having that kind of variety of different stuff, yeah, you pick up on like the human aspect of it. Like, who's the person that made this? Why did they do this? What would they do? What would they want me to do? And yeah, how can I break it?
Well, I mean, have you had that experience of having played someone else's games and then meeting them, like I don't know, was there things where it's like, I mean, I guess that's just the question in and of itself, but I am curious about, like, if you have examples or instances of, like, times you've played certain people's games and then you've met them and, like, you felt like you already knew them beforehand and you sort of, like, it was confirmed after you did meet them?
Kind of. I think, like, the things you learn from playing someone's games, like, they're kind of like little points and of their personality, and when you meet someone, it's very easy. Well, it's not that necessarily very easy, but usually they kind of fit that. Like their personality slots in around those little points. So sometimes it's like, you know, you might meet someone who made a like sort of reality bending puzzle game, and then you meet them and they're a, you know, ridiculously smart person, and they have, you know, ridiculous social traits and stuff, and you're going, yeah, I see that. And sometimes you maybe aren't sure if whatever you're going to say is positive or negative, so you just kind of use, you know, blanket terms for games rather than specify who they are.
Yeah. Well, so what is it, I mean, what do you think it is about you that, like, you know, you talked about, like, and I can't remember if this was before or after we had pressed record, but, you know, like an interest in making games for people who maybe aren't really that into games. Like, I guess I'm curious, like, how did you find yourself, just in the first place, like, being a person who liked games enough that you wanted to, like, explore a professional path with them? I mean, in our emails, you said that you were putting your whole life into doing that. So I guess, like, how did you find that, like, your interest in games took you to that next step, and then there's that other, you know, difficulty step of, like, well, and I want to make games for people who maybe don't really know that they can be interested in games.
I guess, like, growing up, like, all my friends, I wouldn't call them gamers, you know.
Yeah.
I actually wouldn't call anyone a gamer anymore. It seems like a horrible thing, but growing up, I played a lot of video games, and even though my friends didn't, when they came around, they would, you know, if you had a 2-player game, they would play. There was kind of like a universal thing where, like, they may not have an interest in it in the way that they want to sit down at home and sink their free time into it, but but they still appreciate the sort of the play, and especially in a social context, and like in a very casual context. So I guess when I looked at game jams, like I think my main defining moment was like Nordic Game Jam in 2012, 13, and seeing like this sort of auditorium where it's like 100 or two people going crazy over this like little game that was just 4 spaceships sort of on a screen hitting each other. But like it was such a great physicsy, simple, it was basically a sport really. You could see what was going on. The people playing it had never played it before, so there was no like these are competition level people. It's basically just everyone was into it. Everyone was following the action, and I sort of looked at it and thought, well, these people, like, even though they were definitely games enthusiasts, I sort of thought like there's a good kind of market here. Maybe there's like this is the kind of thing that I like, and hopefully if I can reach people that don't consider themselves like video game players, they might at least consider themselves like, oh yeah, but I want to go to these events or these places, and these kind of like new arcade kind of things. And maybe there's a market there. Maybe there's like a potential for a growing, sustainable business.
Yeah, I mean, were you motivated primarily? I mean, maybe it's not just one, but because like definitely, and I'm sure you've seen it too or sensed it, that like there are definitely a lot of people out there who are really into games who either feel this drive or draw to sort of kind of gatekeep video games, or to try to act like it's only for certain people. And then there's also like people who are like, well, I'm it's like self-appointed guardians of video games who like they understand, how to reach people that games aren't reaching, and it's like, and only their way and no other way. I don't know if you felt an affinity or felt like you were, brushing up against either of that. I mean, or was it purely, you said that, like, oh, well, there's a market there. I mean, was it, I guess, like, how much of it was like financial aspirations, and how much of it was like, for the medium aspirations? Maybe it's hard to quantify.
Yeah, I guess like like the financial side sort of came in because it's like I grew up in a small business family, and like my folks ran their own business, and I wanted to like I emulated, like I really liked that sort of lifestyle they had, and I wanted to be, I wanted to run my own business and have it grow. That was kind of like one of my kind of like life goal kind of things. And then I sort of thought, maybe I could do this with games. And then sort of that thing of like, can I make my passion, my career? And I looked into all these different sort of, like in 2015 or so, I went on this huge trip around the world to, it was sort of when the SK Games in Perth closed and Bar SK Melbourne opened. Before I opened the bar, I went looking for like, are there any sustainable business models around that have these kind of games? Because I really like this kind of, like this particular part of the medium, which is sort of like a little bit away from that gatekeeper video gaming, AAA kind of side.
Right.
But it was also very close to some gatekeepery, like indie artsy kind of side. So like, there was definitely, it had its own issues and stuff, but I thought, maybe someone's figured out how to like get around that. Because all the kind of, I guess like when you get gatekeepery on the art side, it becomes like money's a dirty word.
Right.
So, if you're not just doing it for the passion, then you're not one of us, and things are never like, and consequently no one's ever paid properly.
Well, it's interesting, just anecdotally, I feel like the number or it feels often like people who are saying that have a lot of money.
Yeah, usually. I mean,
that's what I've noticed.
yeah, I think like, yeah, it is very interesting when you have people who are consistently not getting paid, but still, doing stuff and living their life and like living well. And it's like, well, that's great for you, but like I don't want to rent for the rest of my life. Like,
Right.
It's sort of like I can, like the SK business had like it never failed. I always expected that either it would make money and be successful, or it would it would fail, and I'd sort of have to shut it down. But it did sort of the worst thing, which is basically it just kept ticking along.
Right.
And I made enough to stay afloat, but I never had anything to save. And I put way too much of my life into it, to the point where it finished up, and I'm going, great, we've got basically nothing left. And I've just said, like, I mean, I've got a lot of memories, put it that way. But,
so where do you? Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. You go ahead. Yeah.
No, that's it.
Well, I mean, I guess I was just curious, like, and just like where do you feel like you are with games now? Because when we emailed a bit, you talked a little bit about your experiences getting financially and personally frustrated with the space. You touched on some like internet drama type stuff. I mean, any one of those things can sort of it changes your relationship with it, and especially when you have, in this case, like you want to support yourself out of what this relationship that you have with games. So I mean, it's I understand like it's a confusing, as you even said when we first got on originally. It's kind of a weird time. Where do you feel like you are with games? Right now as of this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like in terms of my life, I'm at that point where I can't keep spending my time without sort of getting, like it's like I feel like weird being so financially driven, but it's like 32 being like, yeah, better start that savings. And I think like my time with games has been really good, but at the moment, like, I have no idea if I'm going to go back into game stuff. Like, I've had a lot of experience with it, and the last sort of last sort of jobs, I guess, I've looked at have been just like little consulting gigs for like Acme, which is the Melbourne sort of museum of the moving image,
right?
That sort of games and stuff. And originally one of the controllers or one of the games they made back in Perth in sort of 2013, 14, one of them, called Bush Bash, has been recently touring with the V&A's exhibition on video game design, play, disrupt. And that's been over in London and Scotland.
Right.
And it was meant to be at Acme sort of late last year. But then, with all the COVID and everything, they cancelled all the exhibitions. So it would have been a thing where I would have closed down the bar, and then I would have been sort of back in the game scene with this, like with this piece in a museum that has been through Europe. But instead, I'm not, and that piece is getting shipped back to WA, and it'll, hopefully get over to Melbourne at some point. But like, it feels like I really wonder what would have happened if I sort of been still in the scene rather than sort of getting out at the time that I did. I think my relationship with games is pretty, Yeah, like pretty tenuous, pretty like I don't know, pretty sort of stretched at the moment.
So even before COVID, you were feeling that way, though?
Yeah, I think towards the end of the bar, it was getting obvious that there was a really good space for a lot of people, like the bar space. Like I definitely know a lot of game personalities and game people who sort of came up through the bar and like we definitely did a lot, but by the end of it, that was sort of I guess I was realizing that wasn't growing. I guess that wasn't growing into like financial possibilities. It wasn't growing into like more external events or more interesting stuff. It was just going. And if I had like a thriving bar business, then I could just afford to do that on the side, then cool.
Right.
But, yeah.
Well, it's got to be extra weird too, because like, obviously any cases of COVID are bad, but like the difference between, and I'm in, United States, and I may be misinformed, but it has to be strange to be in Australia, where my understanding is there have not been many cases, and then to have an opportunity not go forward because, like, you're not even being as affected by it in your home country as they have been in the UK. And I remember talking to Marie at the VNA. I mean, it feels like 30,000 years ago, but shortly after COVID, and just, hearing about the sort of plans they had over there, and just all the stuff that they had to, cancel or put it in question mark status. I mean, that had to be extra frustrating too. Of like, it's not even having. Well, I don't know when this happened. I guess if it was like last summer or something, it would have been different. But that has to be an extra strange twist on it too, right? It's like you're not even having those kinds of issues down there.
Yeah, well, I think
or to the same extent, I guess I should say. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely not to the same extent. But I think especially in Victoria, we've seen that like it doesn't take much. Like it took a couple of cases to get to our second wave, and then that was huge.
Yeah.
So it's like we've sort of seen the graph do the thing a few times, so it's pretty easy to turn around and say, yeah, like if people are cancelling stuff this year, or last year, or next year, like power to you, do it. Like this is the time to err on the side of caution, I guess.
Right.
But it does, yeah, it did. It definitely did sort of make me think, wow, I spent all of my life doing this. Well, not all of my life, but I spent the last sort of going on 10 years of like, basically focusing on games in social spaces and physical, tactile controls and experiences. And like, yeah, that's pretty much done.
That's going to have to change, in some major way.
I mean, who's going to want to go in, touch a whole bunch of buttons that everyone else has done, right? It's like a weird kind of system.
Well, this feels like a cheesy question to ask, but I mean, obviously, like, there's even, like, stuff changed even more after you had reached this point. And like, what do you wish you knew when you started on this path that you now know? Maybe you don't think of it that way, but I'm sure you had like certain perceptions of like, oh, this is how it's going to be, and I don't know. I have friends who like, oh yeah, here's my 15, 20-year plan, and I'm like, man, I don't know that life works like that, but I hope it does for you.
Yeah. I guess like a lot of the stuff I kind of had to learn the way I learned it. I guess I would have probably if I did, I'd probably go back and be like, go find, like, my partner now, Katie, is like really good with lots of stuff, and especially like saying, when I have an idea and it's like, okay, well, who's going to want that? Like, and not to say that no one will, but like who, and then find out who they are and how do you market to them, and like she's very practical in like the kind of like I can get it to the point, and then she can get it to the point where it's saleable, and like finding someone like that earlier in my life would have been, or I guess consequently I could just do it myself, but
right.
I'm terrible at that. So like, I think that's one of my biggest problems that I had, and one of the things I really wish I could like go back and change was like basically saying don't do it yourself. Like let other people in and take other people's advice and don't be so stubborn. It's like just all this sort of giant things I look back and think, like I struggled a lot with that and that and that and that and that and that.
Yeah.
I didn't need to, and a lot of times I guess I thought I was on the right path, and I was like, I'll see how this goes, and that's kind of like, that phrase sucks, because it's always like, I'll see over the next hill and then I'll make a decision, and then at the top of the hill there's another hill, just,
yeah.
I'll see how it goes, never works out.
I always feel like these types of careers, like, I don't even think of it as a hill. I just think of it as like it's a ladder that everyone's trying to climb, and like the next rung up is actually just the bottom of another ladder, And each rung of these ladders are just filled with like, it's like a waiting room and just lots of people hoping to get their chance to go up to the next. But I don't actually see it. It's not like things get easier when you get to the top of the ladder. But I guess careers are neither ladders or hills. They're just very weird challenges that seem to randomly reward some people and just as randomly take those rewards away or randomly give it to other people. I mean, what do your peers in games, or even your peers outside of games, like, do they, not that they have a crystal ball, but I mean, do they have a like feeling of like where you should go next, what you should do next? I would be curious to hear what your peers think, whoever that may be.
Yeah, I guess like a lot of them are sort of, a lot of them were sad that the bar closed. They, they really liked the space, and they, they always sort of said, well, make another bar. But like, I don't know, like, I guess like since sort of moving out of Melbourne, and moving a couple of hours out of town, like, last year, like, it's been, I haven't really spoken to many people. Like, I've sort of dropped off the radar, and that's been really useful and good, but also, like, I hear questions like that, and I think of questions like that, and I think, I should really, go talk to people who are actually in game about this kind of stuff, because there are, like, there's some good people in Melbourne, there's some good companies and stuff, but no one's given me an idea that I've been like happy with. I guess I gotta go back and see friends again. Like, that'll probably help out with like mental health and all that other stuff as well. But it's sort of it feels so weird being, I don't know, being the guy who ran the space, and now spaces are illegal. So,
right.
Yeah. Being kind of kicked out.
I hadn't thought of it in quite that way, but it's a little. It seems to be some disagreement about that here where I am. But yeah, I understand what you mean. Well, so I mean. So doing what you've done and learning what you've learned, I mean, it's just, like games does this. I think we were talking a little bit about, movies and film before we press record. I think like all spaces, all creative industries, ecosystems do this of being like, well, it's a passion industry. You need passion to be there. You need passion to get ahead. Like, let's just take that as a given. Like, other than passion, what do you think people need to actually succeed in games? I mean, I guess I don't know. I don't mean it like totally open-ended. I mean, I guess maybe like, you know, by like people who you feel like are in your lane. Like, how is success even typically defined, and what do people seem to need to achieve that?
Well, I guess like yeah, I mean, it's hard to find success, especially in my lane, because you know, if you're looking at like, I guess you kind of look at curators and people that sort of event organizers and things, and either they're like sort of working for institutions that aren't, they're working in like a non-game way, or they're just like, you know, we make like the people who run, I don't know, somewhere like GDC.
Yeah.
They're not someone that I would really feel like they're my contemporaries, but they make a big games event. They make a lot of money out of it. They're very corporate.
Right.
As opposed to someone like Marie, who's like, you know, really knowledgeable, really skilled, and found this, or like, you know, ended up in places like the VNA, where I don't know, I have no idea how financially, you know, the VNA is. Like, I mean, these kind of institutions don't really have a great rap for being money makers, unless you're kind of like, you know, the owner.
Right.
He has a really nice. I sat next to him one day, and he had this really good suit. And I thought, wow, this guy's got a really nice suit. And then he was like introduced as like, oh, this is the guy who runs the VNA. And I thought, no wonder. Probably knows where to get good suits. But,
so success would mean having a good suit? Or, I mean, I understand what you mean, though, because like it is symbolic, but it's also like if you have the money for that, then you probably got the money for other things too. Is it primarily? Yeah. Well, I mean, that's important. You know, I don't want to sound like I'm minimizing it. It's, I don't know anyone I don't know anyone in my group of friends or my circle who feels like, yeah, you know what, I have too much money. I have just enough. Like it's definitely a thing.
Yeah, I think it's you get to this point where, like, and it's interesting, like running the bar. I had a lot of friends in craft beer in Melbourne, which was a big part of the bar, and a big sort of passion of mine, and my family and everything. And like, you know, a mate of mine who was doing really well as a rep for this brewery, and you know, he's basically made it to the point where he's only, you know, working 4 days a week or something, and he's loving it because he's just really good at his job. And he basically built this brewery up really by selling it everywhere. And he sort of realized that one day that when this brewery sort of got better and it got, you know, bigger and it got more money behind it, they didn't pay everyone better. They just got more people. You know, they just wanted to expand. And he looked at the other roles in the company, and you know, like, you know, he looked up the ladder kind of thing in that company, and it was basically like everyone sitting there on the second rung, and it's just the owner on the top rung, you know, and even then, the owner's not making, you know, like heaps of money. They just have the investment there. Like you know, the owner's in a good spot because they know that one day they can sell this company, and they have, you know, they've got a really big investment, whereas everyone else is just, you know, making their wages. But yeah, he kind of realized that in that industry, when, you know, he loves the craft stuff, he loves the small business, the passion, but he sort of realized that, yeah, he has to be happy with a pretty shoddy wage, because none of these companies have ladders with rungs high enough that will, you know, pay him enough to afford a house one day.
Yeah.
And I kind of saw a really similar thing in games, especially in Melbourne, where we don't really have, like, I mean, kind of like one or two bigger companies, but Melbourne's really like the hub of like independent stuff, and that's where, you know, people sort of earn so much, and then they subsidize with passion, and it sucks.
Yeah, I mean,
it's good for people who like it, you know.
Well, it's like in the writing world, like if they can't pay you much, especially like Well, if you're earlier in your career, just getting your start with writing, like oftentimes what they'll tell you is if they can't pay you much, they'll say like, oh well, it's you do it for the exposure, and I think like
Yep.
people forget that you could die of exposure in Oregon Trail, for example. But also, like you can't pay your bills with exposure. And again, it's like one of those things where like, well, the person saying it, like, do you see them doing anything for exposure? It's this weird power dynamic. But I think like often in games, and maybe it's just the way our cultures work, where like we don't really talk much about money, at least publicly. Like, so like for the work that you were trying to do in games, and I don't know how. I'm not asking to see your business plan or to ask you to talk about anything you're not comfortable talking about. So, like, because like I know you were also, you were running a bar, and I don't know if it was all considered one business or two separate businesses. But for the work you were specifically trying to do in games, like, where did the development money typically come from?
I suppose like the original SK games in Perth was basically family funded. It was my
you mentioned that. I was curious, like if it was a hard sell, to get involved with anything with games, because like I know like in the U.S. like we don't have even a lot of those types of arts initiatives that other countries do, where they see that like this is a thing that you can invest in or help empower or should. But like you get family involved, and I would have to think that like I don't know. I don't even know if my family even understands what it is that I do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say that they're my most tech-savvy family, but
sure.
I mean, I know that when I wanted half a car, my dad was like, "Yeah, I can get you half a car," and yeah, that helped out. But like I suppose they trusted me a lot. To everyone's detriment. That they were always like listening to my business plans, and they were understanding, and like they weren't in a position where they were going to give me any money that they didn't know where I was going to go.
Right.
And they also like the family got their money from them selling their small business, so. They were really interested in mine. They were really interested because they were bored now. So if they didn't have their own business to play around with, so they were going, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I think it was probably better that they didn't know anything about games, because otherwise, they might have tried to sort of come in and tell me how to run it.
Yeah.
But they gave me free rein, and we, had a lot of different ideas of how we're going to get money out of it and everything, and it just I guess, never really eventuated. But we did make a lot of cool stuff and have a lot of really good events. So like, look back and you can't be mad about it. Would have been nicer if it wasn't so like done now, but I guess it's really hard to tell what's going to make sustainable, what's going to grow, because that's sort of the main thing I think about. It's not necessarily about I'm going to make $1 million or something. It's about like I want to make something that will grow by itself, where I'm tending it rather than dragging it.
Right, or it dragging you.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Like the bar with the bar had to be open certain days, and sometimes that felt like a drag. Like I have to be there every day, and it was. But I guess the other thing was looking at game studios and seeing this kind of like really quick turnover of a studio will assemble, they'd make something, maybe make 2 games or something before creative differences happened, or funding was cut, or they made something crap and everyone left and went and formed new studios. And that coupled with this kind of passion thing, I guess I just looked at the landscape and compared that to things like trade work in Australia, which is really well paid. And you look at things like mining and carpentry and just general kind of trade, and like that stuff's great. People get that sorted. Like you don't pay someone, they don't do the work. You want the work done, pay someone for it. You tell them what to do, they do it. Like it's just so much simpler than knowing the right people, going to the right events, being in the right studio at the right time. Like it's sort of like games don't really know how to run as like business. They just sort of run as like a whole bunch of different garage projects. And I thought that I could sort of jump in and bring my knowledge from other trades and from other sort of business ideas and try to like bring a no-nonsense kind of approach to it.
Yeah.
But I think you could only really do that if you were sort of massive. And yeah, I'm not.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think I personally am wary of anyone who tries to act like they're much bigger than they really are. Like, I can remember once, but I think it's just like a lesson that's taught that, like, to achieve success, you need to be... They don't really tell you how to define success either, but it just seems like the lesson is like, well, you got to seem really big, really important. I remember... maybe not the best example for this sort of thing, but I remember another GDC story. Actually, it would have been around those years you were saying. It might have been 2012, 2013, and I just remember meeting some kid, like literally, like a teenager, and like probably closer to 12 than 20, and he had a business card, and it was like coffee shop studios or something. It was like everyone knows, like, oh, well, to be important, you need to tell people you're a studio, but it's like, you're 2-3 people, which is fine. Like, I don't know. I mean, so like, I wonder about that, but I also wonder, like, and maybe you have some insight into this, maybe you don't, but like, because it sounds like for you, like, there's the money burn from the bar and then the money burn from the games. Primarily, I guess, like, my lens here is on games, but I'm interested in things that do intersect with it as well. So if I say this, I guess, like, any direction that makes sense, like, are there pay structures that you would put in place if you could? Because, like, I think new or other ways people can get paid for doing this sort of work, we can sort of define success a little more clearly, or just know that, like, there are other paths that people can take, but maybe it's just totally behind you and you don't even, I doubt that it keeps you up at night thinking about ways, maybe, ways you could still get paid for this stuff if you could.
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah, I guess, like, I look at, like, I guess at the moment I'm around a lot of people who, I guess, work in trade, and like there's a lot of subcontractors and people who, like, if you need plumbing or something, you call the guy and he's got plumbers under him, and he sends one out, and if he doesn't do well, then that plumber gets the sack, and there's another plumber that's tomorrow. And that guy's, the head bloke's job is just to make sure he's got good staff under him, and he's responding to all the calls and doing all stuff. Like, it just seems like a much better kind of, I don't know, I just look at this kind of system of, that it's not about people's personalities, it's about their job, and if they can get the work done. And I know that, like, especially in events and stuff, there's personalities enter into it a lot, because, you can't, if you tell someone to put on a party, 20 different people will put on 20 different parties. Like, socializing and stuff is a different kind of aspect of people's personalities, and you can't just say get that done. But I guess I look at these different structures, and there's just a really, like, there's real mutual respect involved that I kind of don't see with games. Like the power dynamic is really weird, and it's like the people
weird how.
Job.
Yeah.
It's like like why would like if a job comes up, your primary interest should, or like question should be like, well, how much does it pay? What are its hours? Like, and will that fit into my lifestyle? Like, will I have to commute too far or whatever? Whereas like in games, it's like getting a job is your lifestyle, and the people who offer the jobs or take the jobs, like the power dynamic is really interesting because it's like, you're taking someone, or you're offering someone, you want to be a game developer in a studio, and that's like a good thing. That permeates further than just this is what I do from 9 to 5, and then on the weekends I collect cigars or whatever. It's like, no, you're a game developer, and on the weekend you develop games. It's like, it's a lifestyle rather than a job, and I think that's where I really struggle with it, because it's fine. It's the same as hospitality, really. Like if you run a bar, it's your life, which is great until you get 30 and you sort of start thinking, this sucks. So.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a thing. 30 is the age for pretty much everyone I know where you're like, oh man, I'm going to die someday, and I would like for generally, before then, things to improve before then. So, it's a thing you just can never really explain to people under the age of 30. I have found that, like, all my friends, when they get to there, it's like, oh, yeah, welcome to the club.
There's
so
a
maybe
really good stat in Australian games. I don't know exactly where it came from, but Brendan Keogh presented it at, I think it was at one of the conferences last time, back when conferences were a thing. But it was like, the stat was like 30, I think it was 35 was this age in Australian games where people would, like how old are you? And if you work in games, like this many people are this age, and this age, and this age, and after 35, it's like none. Like, people get to 35 and they're like, no more, because like, I think a big part of it, or what I've learnt, is that passion thing, and that kind of like lifestyle thing. It's a solo career. Like it's if you've got a partner and you've got a family, or you've got like you need your weekends free to fix the house or spend time with your kids and stuff. Like you can't do that, and that's why I feel like that's like a big reason, not just financially, but it's mostly about time that people drop out of games when they're in their 30s.
So less about pay structures, but more about like more flexibility in, because like because there's like kind of two things here. Like I would be interested to talk to you about like, well, where do you think there's like the social aspect of all this stuff, or sometimes the cliquishness that's inherent, as it is just in any groups or group of people, like. So like just this thing we're talking about here with like the how tight-fisted the lifestyle is supposed to be, where it's just supposed to be all-consuming. Where are there double standards in that? Have you found? I mean, I guess I sort of said one. I don't know if that's been your experience as well. Like, well, there's a lot of people who like they say like, oh, well, you're not doing it for the money, but like those are people who have a lot of money. Are there other things like that you've noticed just around this, like how much it's supposed to define you? If you want to have a life in games that goes beyond like, oh, you just enjoy playing them.
I think like if you, I think that the people who go like there's either like the people who run the studios who can make a lot of money, and some studios will pay that down. We'll do it. We'll do the right thing. And my studio I used to work for in Europe did that. Had a successful game, and they treated the company well. I treated the staff well. But also, that particular company was very impure. And I went to GDC while I was working there, so I paid for it because I wanted to, basically I knew I wasn't going to be there forever, and I wanted to look around. But none of their staff went to GDC. They didn't even go to other game meetups or anything. That was just this is your job. You work here. You clock off at 5 o'clock. See you at 9, something goes at 10. That was it. That was kind of good and bad. It was weird because I didn't know anything about the industry as a whole. I was sort of learning in my own time, but it was also good because I had my weekend. There was no kind of push to there was a little bit of crunch stuff here and there, but it was only maybe working till 6, a couple of days a week. It was really nothing to really notice at the time. So I guess there's definitely ways that it can be run properly, but I don't see that represented when I go talk to people. Oh, I'm talking about pay structures again. I keep talking about pay structures. Ugh, who am I?
I asked you about it.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's how these things work, isn't it?
It's okay. You can be disgusted with me.
Yeah, that's good.
You can. It's a free world. You can be disgusted with me. Well, we still talk. It's okay. I don't know. I mean, it's less about all these conversations. I think on some level are about how do video games wind up losing people in some respect, or how is it that people need to kind of distance themselves from it in some way? Because I just feel like there's a lot of damage that's done by a stream of people who are just continually they used to be part of it and now they're not, and it definitely happens with other stuff, people lose interest in reading. I don't know, it's different with the professional access to it all. So no, I mean, it's totally totally fine. I mean, I think probably you're well, you go ahead. Sorry, I don't want to talk over you.
No, that's all right. I think I just I was just thinking of this. I was I better say this before I forget, or not forget, but before I just ignore it. But I think
sure.
The other big thing that I'm probably not talking about because it's harder to talk about is that when you go into the indie game scene and and especially with the bar and stuff, I was really idolizing a lot of people, a lot of scenes, and you bump shoulders with all the cool kids and everything, and you go to the right parties and that sort of stuff, and that was it was fun, and having the bar, and people would come in, and it was great. It was really interesting, really good to see in the scene, to be known and that kind of stuff. And then you have some ex-girlfriend or someone has an issue with you, and then suddenly people can't, people say, oh look, they just can't really associate with you anymore. An ex will tell someone something, and no one will tell you what it was, and it'll suddenly people just they don't come in the bar, they don't talk to you at conferences, or you'll try to put on an event and everyone will pull out. It's really I guess that was the GDC Delete event. It was really successful at the end, and it was really lovely. But the lead up to it and the impact it had on me to have one person spread stuff that they couldn't back up, wasn't true, and just feeling like, okay, now everyone, and talking to these friends, people that I knew through the industry that I really respected and had good times with, and they would say, well, look, we're mates and everything, but I can't make a game for your event because that's how the internet works in this day and age. If I can't associate with you, because that's it. And it's I'm happy to take the rap for whatever I've done, or I'm happy to deal with my own shit. But the way that industry runs off gossip and communication and all these different sort of people. It's just drama, really. It runs off drama, and it just ends up forcing people apart. And that's also incredibly unsustainable for me, at least. And that was really a big thing that sort of just disillusioned me with the whole scene. It also made me sort of look at it from more of a financial point of view and more of an objective point of view, and say why do I actually want to be a part of this thing? I'm not getting anywhere. The only people that are sitting here, that can go to all these conferences, have all this money from basically family stuff as well, or or whatever they've got money from. But it's not from, they're not making money going to GDC and hanging out at the indie party every year. I guess it really put everything into a different perspective for me. So,
yeah, there's a zillion things through my mind, because I as well, maybe I'm trying to think of even the times, or even as a writer, there's been there were plenty of times where I'm not getting paid to be there, and the sort of stuff I'm interested in writing is not always the stuff I'm going to be able to plant stories at the most furthest and widest, and so I always kind of believe that a lot of sometimes you just don't really know what you're going to find interesting until you're there. But it is also just interesting when all this stuff becomes as close to the real world as you can get. It's sort of an artificial thing where everyone's there for some sort of conference or something, but everyone is there together. But I do often wonder about this, and there's just some of this I'm just not privy to, because I don't make games. I don't run in those circles. I definitely know a lot more people who make games, on a different level because of doing all these interviews. But when you talk about that, I guess that's sort of some of what I was curious about, and I just didn't know how sensitive that was for you, of the cliquishness and some of the internet stuff is a whole other thing. I could go off for hours and hours, and I've done a lot of work on it as well. But I guess that's what I wonder about with the double standards question was where, I guess what do you think that people are not, and maybe they are being super introspective about it. Maybe that's why people are kind of quick to drop other people. I guess I don't know. I don't know if the question is what is it you feel people aren't being honest about with themselves about these types of things and the way they play out, but there's also a media angle to it. Stuff gets scooped up as a story without much reporting being done. It's just very quick, blunt, spreading rumors, or just well, here are the tweets and this is a story. We're not gonna reach out and interview anybody, or we're not gonna see what actually happened. Maybe there's not really a question in there. I mean, it did start off as a question about pay structures, and it did take a bit of a turn. So there's no question mark on the end of this. But if anything I'm saying here, you have a reaction to, I would definitely, be interested to hear it.
Yeah, I guess it's I don't know, it comes down to what people, when someone said to me, hey, I can't be part of this thing, because I stay out of this kind of stuff, and
right.
That was their kind of motto, with this kind of thing is like if drama comes near them, they disappear. They don't want to be associated with any kind of drama. You know, like there's no right side to be on.
You know, but like I've run across stuff like that, and it's always like as if a person is choosing to be a part of a drama. You know, I mean, there's like all sorts of circumstances and stuff, but sometimes like, especially around like stuff around video games, like I've noticed a lot of that kind of reaction that sort of implies like, well, you know, I have a choice, as if like someone is choosing to, you know, suddenly have a crosshairs on them, or to kind of have rumors spread with no substantiation that like, I don't know.
I guess like it's like, you know, just to go back to like one of those questions of like, what would you tell your younger self kind of thing. Like, there's like coming to Melbourne, like going to see different scenes. I guess like Melbourne was interesting because it's got such a thriving independent scene, and then it's, I mean, they're all independents really, but there's the arts. You guys go somewhere, there's like an artsy kind of scene, and then there's like a kind of businessy kind of scene, in games at least. Probably, you know, music and other things as well. And sometimes you go into like an area and there'll be some conflict between those two kind of things, or at least some drama.
Right.
And, you know, and it's, so, you know, these people think this and these people think that, you know. But, like, as a good rule of thumb, you know, the people who are going to be making the drama are probably the artsy people, because that's what they do for a living, you know, like, it was really, like, you know, I came into Melbourne being, you know, friends with all this artsy crew, and they were great, like, and they're, you know, lovely people who do amazing stuff, and, you know, and then they would tell me things about the other side, and then you talk to the other side, like people who are working, you know, in studios, and they're going, what are they talking about? Like, the people who have cool artsy ideas also fabricate lots of things in their head, and, you know, have like different points of view and all this kind of stuff, and it's fine, it was what makes them amazing, but it also, you know, you got to take all that stuff with a hefty pinch of salt. And I wish I kind of knew that going into it a bit better. Because it's sort of like, yeah, I think that's the whole thing about it. Like, I was sort of trying to bring in this kind of like, oh, what if I could, you know, change this pay structure, do this kind of like business structure, like do this like no bullshit kind of approach. But I was taking that into like this kind of artsy independent scene. And, you know, as much as like it's a great scene, it is full of bullshit. Like it lives and breathes on bullshit, and it's great. Like it's really good bullshit. But it's
very potent.
It's still bullshit. It's just like a combustion engine. Like, you know, it needs shit to power, and like, yeah, it just wasn't compatible with where I wanted to end up. I feel like I got swept up in a lot of that bullshit, and it was good. Like, I enjoyed it. But yeah, there was no, like, you know, you don't get to this point where all the independents all the indies sort of say, oh, and by the way, here's the secret you do to make money out of this sort of stuff. By the time you sort of learn how everyone gets their money, you find that it's nothing to do with video games.
Right. Well, that actually leads into to talk more about money. I mean, I understand that you're in a place with it where you're like, well, you know, like you kind of put it behind you. But I mean, if that, you know, if that wasn't an issue, money, you know, what would you make?
I think I would definitely make games again. Like,
just in general, yeah.
Yeah, I think I would make. I mean, I would go back into looking at, like, if money was an option, I would really want to figure out how I could take my kind of like big controller installation games and bring them into like a COVID-safe kind of, you know, society. Like, Whether that was like, right, you can only let certain amount of people at a time, or you have to like, maybe part of the game is sanitizing everything, or
Right.
I would love to explore that more. And at the moment, I'm like, I don't know if maybe there's a business in there, maybe there's money in there, but like at the moment, I don't have the ability to take that kind of risk. But if money wasn't an option, I would go back and make more controllers, make more like weird events. Do some like push some more boundaries, I guess. People still like message me about the dildo controller being like, where's the dildo joystick controller thing going?
Well, so I mean, I don't know if this is for the COVID one or like for the more ambitious ones, but because I feel like this stuff is so rarely discussed. I mean, how much would it take to actually, do one of those more kind of ambitious ideas? You can say it in Australian dollars. You don't need to, unless you happen to know what it would immediately translate into. I can quickly Google it, so you can speak to me in your own language with money.
Yeah.
You don't need to dumb it down for me.
Yeah, I mean, like, it depends. Like, it's mostly about like, games all about takes time. But like, if I was to make another big game, I guess I would look at, it would cost a couple of grand for hardware, and then because you'd want hardware to be. I guess I wouldn't make something. I used to make stuff with out of things I found on the side of the road, and that was great. But you spend way too much time fixing it and trying to screw it all back together, because people don't throw out useful stuff, unfortunately. But like for a couple of grand, I could make something like the sort of hardware side really good, and then it depends on. Games can take a long time to make. But ideally, I'd say probably about maybe about the same amount of money in a game. Like, so for I guess if you said $5,000 or less, I could put it on as like a big event. I don't know what that is in the US. Probably about 8.
For $5,000?
$5,000 Australian is probably what
probably close to like 4 or something. I don't know. Obviously, conversion rates and everything are real weird right now.
Yeah. Yes. But it wouldn't take a lot. I think it's just about the big thing is time. And actually, like one of the things we're looking at the moment, me and my partner. I guess one of the big reasons that money keeps coming up is that we're looking for a house. And I've got a job at the moment that's pays me 30 paychecks, so I'm like, keeping hold of that for a bit. But when we get a house that we can, with some land, I'm gonna buy like an old shipping container, and basically sort of try to turn it into like a little exhibition that we can.
Oh, cool!
Like a truck and rock up somewhere.
Like a pop-up space almost, or something.
Yeah, and it's going to be small, which is probably good for like how many people you can get in there at once. Might run sessions and sanitize between or whatever. Like, there's ways we can sort of make it, I guess, COVID-proof. Is how people are describing new business models. Not that we're thinking of it as a business model. That's the big thing with us as well.
Right.
We're thinking like, we could buy this for a couple of grand, and we can put it in the backyard. And if we ever want to move it somewhere, you get a tilt tray. It's got like $100 an hour or something. And it's sort of, it's not too much to move it around, but we can just work on it on a weekend. We can sort of figure it out over a long time. It's sort of taking away the idea of it has to be sustainable, because at the moment.
I was going to say it's interesting because as opposed to a bar, I don't know. I'm not asking to see your business plan, but as compared to a bar, it's interesting because as a roving space, it may actually eliminate a lot of the sort of headaches and costs, but then I don't know how it would deal with, like, you know, where you put it and where you set it down and what's involved with that. But that's pretty cool, and I can't say I've heard of anyone doing a thing like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it might work, it might not, but
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, because I guess I mentioned in passing here, you know, my coming from like the writer media side of the aisle, like something you did mention in your email was you mentioned, I'm going to quote this back to you, that journalists, quote, don't know how to really explain what games are because no one really can. So less about just like games themselves. I guess what I'm curious is like what realities of game development or like ambitious people trying to do interesting things in games, does it seem like media doesn't typically understand in the first place, or maybe even realize like they could be covering? Because I think like some of what we're talking about, like maybe it's not up to media, not media solely, but I guess I am curious, like, you know, like if these messages were sent elsewhere, it may be less of a hard sell, the sort of things that you're trying to do, you know?
Yeah, well, I guess I kind of think about it like when we I've been talking to a partner about the you know, buying this big shipping
container. Yeah.
And it's like, you know, we could put paintings in it, you know. You could sort of paint the inside white and run some MDF down the sides or whatever, and you know, wax some LEDs and shining it against the walls and hang, you know, have them like a little mobile art gallery with some paintings in it. You'd have to look at them pretty close, like, you know, but so like, you know, you could do that, or you could put video games in there, and like if you went to the, you know, the local news station and said, hey, you know, we're going to put this up in the middle of town or whatever, like, I guess it's interesting to think about how it would be presented if it was full of paintings versus if it was full of games. And, you know, I think that's, like, to me, I don't really see much of a difference. I mean, obviously, it depends on the games, right? You know, if you fill it full of Mario Kart, or like, you know, actual arcade games, then there's different stuff going on. But if I turn around and like commissioned a bunch of games, you know, which I really like doing, like if I commissioned a bunch of games and put them in there, then like I still feel like the news, you know, journalists would sort of say, look, there's a pop-up like arcade, like a pop-up time zone. I don't know if you guys have time zone. It's like I don't know, what's like a regular arcade, with like, you know, for kids, with a lot of flashing lights and like loud noises, basically that kind of thing. So like, yeah, I feel like journalists would describe it very differently, and that's kind of one of the issues I have with what I've been doing. Is, you know, I always wanted to put games into a space that art exists in, and, you know, and that includes putting it into articles and reviews and publications where, you know, in place of art, not in place of, you know, the review of the newest Mario or whatever.
Right.
Because I'm not trying to, like, you know, like, it's like I'm not competing with, you know, with Mario or Death Stranding or whatever, you know, new random game that's coming out, even as artistic as, you know, wandering across a wasteland with a whole bunch of boxes on your back, drinking mother and pissing every day. Like, that's good art. But it's, you know, it's not what I'm trying to usurp by, you know, modding beer cans into Doom or whatever it is I feel like doing that day. And I feel like that's the annoying thing, is whenever I bring up this kind of, like, these kind of games and, you know, like, come to a journalist or something, and it's like, you know, well, and to be fair, like, it's not like necessarily a game journalist I'm talking to, but like,
right,
talk to someone about it, about like, you know, yeah, like this local brewery and, you know, my small bar commissioned this local artist to make a game about the sphere or whatever, you know, people sort of go, oh, well, you know, the gamers don't really care. Like, I'm not trying to talk to them, I'm trying to talk to the arts people, you know. Put it in the cultural part of your magazine, not the kind of like game review section. You know, it seems like it sort of just misses the point. It's like games aren't really there yet. But in a lot of ways they are, I should say. Like, there's a lot of like really good people doing really good stuff. Like, I'm not.
No, for sure. I'm just reflecting on like how many, because you know, I've done a few of these conversations through the years, and like, I don't know, like I'm always wondering, like, you know, like progress certainly never looks like what we imagine it will or should, and for people who see the need, it's always going to seem to be moving the slowest. But like something I've just kind of increasingly been wondering is like, well, is it about like recalibrating expectations from certain spaces and like pinning more hopes in other spaces? You know, is it a thing where like, well, it's going to take a lot of different people taking a lot of different approaches, and like together things will harmonize? And you know, because I don't want to ask like, oh, well, are you optimistic about it, or do you feel like, because it seems like, well, you know, like wherever you are, doing your own thing is going to be tough. And then it can also have that dissonance of like, well, actually, we're making a lot of inroads. It just didn't work out for me personally. Trying to do something different. There's so many things of like to like sort through. Where it's like, well, am I even looking at this like, you know, soberly and correctly? Because like, I'm sure you talk to some people and they're like, oh, we're already there. We're there. What are you talking about? But then you're like,
definitely.
But then you're like, well, but look at all this stuff, and look at all the people we've lost, and look at how unsustainable it is. I mean, you even said that, like, you know, maybe we talked a bit about this. You know, like how for a lot of people working in games, they have to make a choice between working in games or owning a house, or for like a lot of small studios, like they only have a lifespan of 3 years. So I go back and forth on this. Man, where like I wonder, like, well, if games were good enough, then maybe it wouldn't be such a slog to get there. You know, like maybe it's just the thing is like people haven't made the stuff that's legitimately interesting and worthy of it. But it's not all up to, you know, capital G games. Like there's all the stuff around it. But it would stand to reason, like, if people can't stay there. You know, because it just feels like, well, this is even like kind of well known that like it's super brutal and it's hard, and there are very modest gains if there are any. It just feels like people love to read about the misery. They love to write about the misery. They love to contribute to the misery. But it's like, well, where's the action that lessens it or offsets it? It's not really. It's like a you know, a question with no answer, really.
Well,
I'm not asking
like
you. I'm not asking you why are you withholding the action.
Sorry. I'll be better. I can change.
Okay.
No, I think
I've heard this before.
I think.
Sorry. Continue.
Like, yeah. Like the kind of the annoying thing is that when someone does say like, you know, and here's the positive, it's like, you know, it's usually like, and games make more than movies and music combined or whatever. You know, it's like, look at all the money that the games make. And it's like, yeah, that's not the positive, you know, like that's, like, you know, that's what a lot of people have to say to industry to, like, you know, try to, like, can we please have, you know, government subsidies for game studios? Can we please have, like, the same level of support from the government, you know, that film and television and music get? So, like, it's, you know, because that, you know, like, that way, things, you know, small studios could survive. And you could get more of an even playing field rather than just have, like, huge, big monopolies.
Right.
Because, like, you know, like, at the moment, it's like, yeah, you can, that's sort of the two things. It's like, on the one hand, you know, games are a slog and no one gets paid enough, and it sucks. And on the other hand, they make so much money. And it's like, those are two, they both point the same way. Of like, you know, they make so much money, it's fucked. Like, and it sucks making them, it sucks. Like, yeah, there's no, like, actually it's all cool, guys. Like, there's no good news out of it. Except, unless you happen to, like, own EA or whatever, which unfortunately I don't.
Right.
But it would be helpful, I imagine. So, you know, if you wanted to, I would suggest that.
Just own EA is the solution.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was staring at us. It was staring at us this whole time, right in the face. It was so obvious. But it is interesting. Like, I don't even think I've heard that those dots connected in quite that way before, which is totally true. Which is like, I think people are familiar with, excuse me, you know, the 1%. But it's like, well, of course, a similar thing would manifest in games. Like, you know, all these systems mirror the bigger systems that are in place.
Yeah.
I think it often, I don't know if it's passion or what it is. It just seems to be like, yeah, we're aware there's a lot of problems, but, you know,
yeah,
tough, basically, seems to be often the marching orders in games.
Yeah, I mean, there's...
or it's like tough and we're not going to do anything about it here today, anyway. Yeah.
I mean, there's just not that kind of, like, captive workforce in other industries. You know, like there was talking to a mate the other day about this bloke, and he's doing his apprenticeship for I think maybe like roof plumbing or something, and he's working for this bloke, and his boss is a pain in the ass, you know, like absolute not the greatest, and
yeah,
because I always got to say something like, oh, that's right, Americans really don't like the word cunt. So I try not to say it to Americans.
Wait, what? Americans don't like the word ton?
Cunt. Not like that.
I've not heard that. I mean, I've heard the word. I wasn't aware this was I've heard of many stereotypes of Americans. Us not liking the word ton is a new one.
Oh, well, there you go. I know Canadians don't like it, but
I wouldn't go by me though. I'm probably not typical. So
yeah.
Anyway, please continue.
Anyway, so the young bloke's working for this prick, I guess the thing was that once he got to the end of his apprenticeship, which is sort of 4 years, like as soon as he finished that and he got his apprenticeship, then that means he's got a trade, and then, you know, and he was out the door like the next day. Like he was not, you know, he wasn't going to talk to this guy. He was, you know, like he was just done. But for those 4 years, he could have left for sure, but like he would have had to start again with a new company and start the 4 years later. So like he was captive at the time, and now like he was getting paid just enough, and you know, the poor guy. But then, you know, but as soon as he could, yeah, he was out the door, and he knew. You know, like a handful of blokes who were ready to pick him up because they knew that he was really good, and they knew that he worked for this guy, and they were all waiting for the day that he finished his apprenticeship and come knock on the door, which he did. And it's like, yeah, I see a lot of people be captive in games, you know, like they've got nowhere to go, or they can't move internationally or interstate, and there's only a limited number of places to work. So like it just feels very much like that. I guess that comes out of like how I don't have a game where if they're not happy, if they're not getting enough, the other option is just not getting anything. Whereas when this young bloke finished his apprenticeship, he knew that there were so many that he knew that he was valuable, and he knew what he was worth, and he went out there and he played off the employers against each other to get a good deal, and that's like the complete opposite of games. You know, these people who are like struggling so much, and you talk to them and you go, man, like you know so much stuff, and you're so talented, and they're like, but they don't know one programming language for a certain amount of years or whatever. it's like this weird, impossible standard. And I think that, it also comes from society being like games are the best, and it's so cool that you make games and stuff. No one thinks it's cool if you're a roofliner, but he's probably getting paid more than anyone I know in games.
Yeah. I don't know that I have another point to put on it, but it's like, well, I was just thinking of like how often, I think you even mentioned it before with like carpentry too, but like how often like I've heard people in these kind of creative spaces be like, oh, well, maybe I should have pursued a vocation instead, skipped over all these other paths that seem to have gotten you into a bad place. I don't know. I mean, I have one last question here, but I don't know if there was anything else that you wanted to touch on or explore, because obviously, as you sensed, this was a conversation and we jumped around quite a bit.
I guess, just on that last point, it's sort of like, I think everyone who, we have the same kind of sort of conversations of, could have pursued a vocation or a trade and been an electrician or whatever. But you talk to people about that and they'll say, oh, I should have done that. But they also know, everyone knows that, I was destined to do this kind of crap, and I look at all the stuff that I've made and I think, no one else would have made that, I had to go do that.
See, I had a conversation like this a couple of years ago with someone in TV, and I was floating the theory of because I ran into this too very early in my career, and there's other places I'm trying to get to and stuff still. I'm totally the same for me. I don't know anyone who's I got enough stability, I got enough money, I got enough whatever. I ran into that thing very early on where I was well, I guess I should try to get advice or talk to people who, not show you the ropes, but just give you a sense of what it's really like, and just the people I talk to who are oh, well, you don't want to be a writer, which I think is kind of well known. No one, it's a terrible line of work. The pay is horrible. There's no opportunities. I was talking to this person in TV about this sort of thing the other, it was before COVID, and I was just trying to figure out, well, I mean, how much of it is people trying to, because the way I received it when I was younger, it was oh, well, they just they want to see if they can scare me off, and if I can show that I'm not going to be scared off, then the conversation will go a different way. But sometimes I wonder well, is it just people who are established in a certain space looking to not have more competition? They're just trying to keep more people from coming in, so that way there's that many fewer people who could be competing for the same opportunities. Not that someone who's brand new coming in would, and I don't even think that's the way opportunities work in general, but I still flash back on that from time to time. I'm I wonder how much of that is a contributing thing. But the thing that I think is kind of mind-boggling about games, and if people feel trapped in them, is as someone who can't program or code, that's always the thing that people have told me or told people in my space is oh, you should go back to school and you should learn how to code, but it feels too late now to go and learn stuff that other people have known all along. So I don't know. I guess I'm just sort of responding to what you were saying.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting in terms of the job I have now is I got in there and they said, oh, what did you used to do? So I used to run a bar. All right, cool. Do you know anything about 12-volt electrical systems? Kind of. Whatever I don't, I can learn.
Right.
And I said, yeah, cool. See you Monday. And I've learned. There's a lot more willingness to kind of all right, you seem alright. Yeah, you've got the right attitude. Show up with your boots on, and I can still, get on the tools. Whereas, yeah, you start looking at jobs in games, and there's just, I guess there's so much competition as well.
Yeah.
And then, in that way, they just go, we'll add some qualifiers, and you need this kind of degree and this much skill and that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's difficult.
Oh, this feels like an even further down note than for my last question to ask you. This final one, but so yeah, what do you feel like video games have accomplished? You can answer like from a personal perspective, or you can answer from like overall, or you can talk about like, just like really whatever the first thing that comes to your head.
I guess like I look at it from kind of an artsy kind of point of view, I guess, and I see video games in an art sense accomplishing like when you go to a really nice gallery, like you sort of I was in London, it's like I'll go to the Tate Gallery or whatever, Tate Modern, and you see these paintings, you're like, I've seen that one. Not in real life, but like you know a painting's good when you've seen it before, and you have that thing in the back of your head where you think, God, I'd love to just get a spray can, just fucking put a big X over it, get a crayon and draw on his face, and like all this stuff, and like I don't know, it's that thing of like I see this thing, I like this thing, I want to be part of it, I want to interact with this thing, and games to me like really scratch that itch. And I've seen so many people come into my bar and like just to have drinks and hang out, and they're like looking at some projection on the wall, and then they go over and play with a button or whatever, and it changes, and just seeing that kind of like difference of going from passive to active. Taking a bit of ownership of like, I made the screen look the way it looks, whatever. Like this kind of thing of like, you're part of this thing. You're not just walking through the gallery. You're not just like sitting here having a drink. You're a part of the equation. Like that's like the thing that I really appreciate about games. Even big shitty AAA ones that that you're doing exactly whatever else is done, and you're basically just experiencing it the same way, but it's like, yeah, but I'm doing it, and my character's pausing to stand awkwardly in the street because I'm going to have a sip of my beer at this time. Like everything is related to me kind of thing. It brings people into a medium, and I think that's like a lot more than anything else in place. As much as like books are like, you live it in your imagination, like fuck that. Like books are for nerds. It's great.